recording this meeting. The primary purpose of the recording is really to be a backup for our note-taking, but we want to make sure everybody knows that the meeting will be recorded. And then the last item I wanted to make sure everybody knows is that today's focus of this meeting is on, of course, the agency request budget. There may be questions about other subject items, but we have limited time with you today, and we want to make sure that we're focused on answering as many questions and providing as much information as we can about our agency request budget. And with that, Sydney, would you be willing to pull up some slides for us?
Yes. No, I understand it. Yes. So I am sure we'll show you.
And we will go into the next slide. Today's agenda, and you'll see it there on the slide, is that we are going to do a very quick overview of the current budget landscape here in Oregon and some budget realities that we are going to see next session. We'll go into breakout rooms and we're going to review legislative concepts. But before then, we'll do a very quick overview of the agency's legislative concepts and policy option packages. We are going to try and reserve a lot of time in our breakout rooms that are based on divisions for going over those legislative concepts and policy option packages in more detail and answering questions. We will make sure that everybody knows the agency request budget timeline so that you know the next steps in the process. And then when we are done with the breakout rooms, we'll come back just for a few minutes to make sure that everybody knows what the next steps are for the agency. So very quickly, that is our agenda for today. And Sydney, we can move to the next slide. So as I said, we're going to start with some legislative priorities and budget realities. And the very first thing you can see on the slide is that it is a different landscape this next biennium that we're entering than probably previous ones. So it will look and feel different for the 2027 to 2029 biennium than it has in the past. In the past, you probably have joined us as we asked you for your thoughts and ideas on budget requests to make of the legislature, and perhaps you even helped us prioritize those budget requests. This time, the direction that state agencies received from the governor's office and from the state chief financial office was that we really needed to focus on budget neutral ideas for the 2027. So instead of thinking of expanding or new programs, really what they wanted us to focus on were improvements, efficiencies to already existing programs and services. This is, I should say that this is really focused on general fund resources. So those dollars that are coming from the state's general fund, and that we have received some flexibility for requests that are for other types of resources, such as bonds. However, and we'll go into the middle part of that slide right there, we've heard similar messages from the legislature about really focusing on cost-neutral ideas. And I realize I missed one of the points at the very beginning of the slide, and that is why. Why are they looking at budget-neutral and cost-neutral ideas? And the primary reason is because the state is looking at reduced general funds for the next biennium, as well as increased state costs. There are probably a number of reasons for this, but one of the reasons is Congress passed a bill last year, H.R. 1, and that bill, as well as other actions from the federal government, have really changed the relationship between the federal government and state governments as far as cost sharing, the share that the federal government is paying as opposed to the share that the state government is paying. Oregon is looking at having to make some decisions, as all states are, about what are the items that the state is going to start perhaps paying more for those items because there has been a change in the relationship about how much the federal government is paying? And what are the items that the state just won't have the resources to do that anymore? There are not enough state resources to backfill everything that the federal government has changed the relationship on. So the legislature is going to have to make some difficult decisions next year. This is one of the reasons why we have been, as all state agencies, have been directed to have cost neutral ideas next session. So policy ideas and budget asks that are cost neutral. Legislators, going back into the middle part of that slide, have really been talking to us about wanting to see new methods of housing finance. In fact, some of the wording they've used with us is that they want to see innovation and different ways to finance housing within our current budget. So again, really focusing on looking at existing programs rather than expanding for different services. They've also talked to us about alternative funding methods outside of bonds and general funds. So I think one of the messages we can take away from conversations with legislators is that their appetite for perhaps some of the substantial funding, whether through bonds or general funds, is perhaps not as great as it has been in the past. So we'll be looking at a very different budget situation for the 2027 session than we have in previous biennia. With that, I'm going to go to the very last part of the slide and just say one of the questions we've been asked is, what are we hearing then from legislators? What are they interested in working on in the 2027 session? And we've listed a few things here that we've heard legislators are continuing to express an interest in working on in the land supply or trying to make. We've also heard that legislators are interested. They have expressed interest in past because insurance is really an issue that impacts the whole housing continuum. And I'm sorry, I'm having a low bandwidth problem. There we go. Insurance is really a problem across the whole continuum, and legislators are really interested in how and in what ways the legislature can support everybody from shelter to home ownership with insurance. And they'd really like to be able to continue working on insurance in the 2027 session. Those are just a few items that we've heard about for the 2027 session. And of course, those concepts will continue to be developed. And so there'll be a lot more information about all of them as we get closer to session. But hopefully that, even though I have had some bandwidth problems this morning, hopefully that gives you an idea of the budget realities that we're entering for the 2027 session, as well as some of the areas that the legislature has told us that they're interested in working on for the 2027 session. All right, we'll move into the next slide. And Director Bell, I will turn it over to you.
Wonderful. Thanks, Jill. Morning, everybody. It is really good to be in virtual community with you. Thanks for being here. Thanks for making the time to engage with all of us on Oregon Housing and Community Services 2027-29 agency request budget. This virtual conversation is right on the heels of an in-person town hall that we had earlier in the week. While we certainly had a smaller group than what we had today, nonetheless, there is a lot of energy, a lot of interest around not only the contents of our budget, but its relationship to the housing future of our state and for the people that we serve. So we're immensely grateful for you being here. We have a wide and diverse crowd. So whether it is your first time engaging in the state's budget process, or whether you are a seasoned partner who have gone through many budget cycles with us, I will just say explicitly, we need your insights. We need your feedback to ensure the body of work that is contained, the vision that is articulated within the agency request budget is accurately and robustly shaping the housing future and delivering materially for the people that we serve across the state. So we welcome all feedback, including critique, and also if there are things that you see as vulnerabilities, we welcome and appreciate all of it. I would imagine that most of us in our either day-to-day life, whether that just be on a personal level or just professional perspective, often hear from folks that are struggling every day, whether that be around not being able to find an affordable place that they can afford in the community that they call home, whether they are contending with the rising costs of childcare. If you are a developer or owner operator and you are one of the important partners that we rely on to deliver increased housing supply and you are contending with their economic realities of operating costs, or if you're just an Oregonian and you want to be able to buy a home and the future of that looks bleak and harder, I say that as a collective summons as we need all of our best players off of the bench in this moment. So both a rear view thank you for all of the progress that you've been able to help us make possible so far. And it is also a future forward thank you because, my friends, we got a lot of work in front of us to be able to keep delivering on the commitments that we made. What I'll just say is the budget process, both for the state and certainly for the agency, it is inherently full of jargon and technicalities. We are going to do our best to cut through all of that today and to try to be as clear and specific about what the problem is, what we're trying to do about it, and the why behind it. So if you find us getting stuck in jargon and technicalities, tell us that, hold us accountable, and we'll make sure that we can be as responsive. Just to very briefly expand on what Jill mentioned ahead of us going into the breakout conversations here. So I want to maybe just elaborate a bit on where we're at in terms of the fiscal realities, what we as an agency have done so far, informed by many of the partners in the everyday experience of the people that we serve, and then just briefly what lies ahead. So it's probably not a shock to anybody that the fiscal environment, both from a state and from a federal perspective, is evolving. It is not what it once was. And so, given the pressures of reduced general fund and some of the increased state costs that are a byproduct of some of the federal changes, we are going to need to prepare for the likely circumstance that there is no funding available to pursue program expansions in the 27-29 budget. So if you're a partner and you've been with us over the last 5 to 6+ years, what you probably are accustomed to, what we've been accustomed to, are biennia after biennia where we have had expansive level of resources. And that is likely not the case here. And so as we're doing our work together, our focus is going to have to make sure that we are remaining on delivering the core mission that people are relying on us to be able to do, that we can continue to center and explicitly advance solutions that are going to address cost of living, that are going to make sure that life here in Oregon can be one of shared prosperity, regardless of where you live in the state. So if you in Oregon's small towns and rural communities, if you're in one of our urban or densely populated communities, regardless of what you look like or where you come from, if you are an Oregonian here in the state, we want to make sure that you have full ability to participate in the richness and the progress that we are trying to pursue together. And so as you're looking through our proposals, just know that this is certainly a different budgetary environment that we're going through. So you're going to hear us talk a lot about budget neutral proposals. It also means that a lot of what you're going to see is not expansion, but primarily a continuation of existing programs. What you're also going to see in terms of what we've done so far is also trying to take a look at where we can make things work better. I'm sure as many of you who work with us, or maybe just have sort of the notion of what it means to have state programs and whether this agency or government in general is working for you, there are always ways that we can make things work better, more explicitly reduce bureaucracy, make things much more streamlined, and where we can make sure that we are not relying on antiquity for how we solve problems, Government has to be able to keep up with the pace of change. This agency is not exempt from that. And so, as you were seeing us try different things on, both in terms of how we operate and how we try to do our business and get resources out the door, if you see us trying new things on, your eyes are not deceiving you. It is a reality that there is a level of public excellence that we need to be able to keep up on, deliver. And so we need to be able to do that not only from the perspective of how things get done in the most big, expansive things, but also some of the smaller, really important things that matter too in terms of real material efficiency. And then the last thing I'll just say is in terms of what lies ahead is some of this might feel a little bit like a wet blanket. And I want to just sort of acknowledge that. Our intention in being explicit and clear about that is so that we can collectively come from a place of shared truth and reality about where things are at. I'm also we are asking for your engagement and part of a call to action so that we do not have a dulled ambition. Strife and challenge and hardship is not new to Oregon. We have done a lot of tough things. One of them is just surviving and engaging through the pandemic. As a recent example, but we cannot have a dulled ambition. We know that there is a collective mandate from a lot of people across Oregon to do what we can to make everyday life better and more affordable. So we're going to need to work smarter and think about, yes, innovation, but not innovation just for the sake of innovation. Innovation is going to deliver for folks. And so that is where we are centered. That's our prism, is to not have a dulled ambition going into this evolving environment. So with all of that, we are ready, prepared for your engagement and feedback about how we do that, even as we have to order our steps a little bit differently than how we have in the past. So thanks for making the time. Thanks for being here. And I will turn it back to the team so we can get it into the bulk of our time today.
Thank you, Director Bell. All right, Sydney, we will move to the next slide. So here we have a list of the agency's legislative concepts. On this slide, we're going to go over legislative concepts that we are working on for the 2027 session. And the next slide is going to have a list of the policy option packages that we're working on for the 2027 session. I know many people have been through this process many times, but just to make sure that we're all on the same page, legislative concepts are really more of those policy ideas that we're working on for next session. Policy option packages are really more of those funding ideas that we're working on for the 2027 session. So this is just a very, very quick highlight, a brief overview of these legislative concepts and policy option packages, and then we are going to go into breakout rooms based on divisions and talk in more detail about the division-specific LCs and POPs. But to start, Nathan, why don't I turn it over to you so you can introduce yourself and talk a little bit about homeownership's legislative concepts.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Nathan Clark. I use he, him pronouns. I am on the GR team and I support our homeownership division. I'll also be leading the conversation in the homeownership breakout room. So if you want to come and chat more, we'll be hanging. So I have three legislative concepts I'm going to go over very briefly, and we'll dive more in depth here soon. So our direct-to-loan delivery platform is a very fancy term for what we'd like to do is when we do our loans, we sell our bond-based loans on the to-be-announced, the TBA market. We currently use a middleman, essentially, an outside firm that will sell these for us. And so we are asking to have statute change to allow us to do this in-house, which will allow us to save on those costs and then be able to sell at a better time that makes us the most money, and then take that revenue and put it back into our programs. So that's direct to loan delivery platform. Our short-term capital financing, we're asking to have statutory changes, which would allow us to increase the number of loans that we're able to offer on a monthly basis. So we have a cap that when we reach, we can't offer any more loans until we have other ones finalized and move out of our pipeline. So we want to be able, when the market's hot, to have the opportunity to flex as needed to to support additional homeownership opportunities. And this third one is still in development, so I can't speak too much to it, but we are looking at raising the fee for the Manufactured Marina Communities Resource Center. It hasn't been raised since 2019, and before that, it was 2007. So it's fallen far behind the increase in inflation. And so we're looking at some options to increase that, but that is still ongoing conversations.
Thank you, Nathan. Why don't we go to Henry? And Henry, can you introduce yourself and talk briefly about affordable rental housing legislative concepts?
Happy to. Good morning, everyone. Henry Taylor Golby, Government Relations Coordinator for ARH and Disaster Recovery. Going through affordable rental housing legislative concepts, the first one here is supportive housing. This is just really to codify the work that our Affordable Rental Housing Division has been doing on permanent supportive housing from the governor's 2601 executive order earlier this year, and take that work and put it in statute. It creates 3 tiers of permanent supportive housing. On tier 1, we have the service enriched option for residents that require moderate or limited assistance. Tier 2 is intensive PSH for people exiting institutions with high behavioral health needs. And then the tier 3 is the central PSH model that we've been using for a long time now for individuals experiencing chronic homelessness. On the Oregon Affordable Housing Tax Credit, essentially what we're looking to do is allow OHCS to take unused OHTC credits and make them available to CDFIs or housing-focused nonprofits. Those groups would then sell those credits to investors, and proceeds from those sales could go to funding for a specific development, get pulled with other funds for development or preservation purposes, or transferred to the agency so that we can use them in our existing OHCS programs. On that last one, really, we're also designing a fund that creates a lot of flexibility so that we could pair with donations, for example, from philanthropic partners at the agency to be able to use funds flexibly depending on what the market needs. And then this last one on pre-development, we're just expanding again the eligible uses for the Housing Development and Guarantee Fund to allow for those funds to be used for pre-development. Pre-development's been a very hot topic recently, and we know that there's an outstanding need, and so we have some funding that we can make flexible, and are going to see if we can do that in the 27 session.
Thank you, Henry. I will quickly highlight Housing Stabilization Division's LC's. Housing Stabilization Division, or HSD, is working on 2 items that have to do with tribal housing. The first one you can see there is an LC having to do with the Tribal Housing Grant Fund. The legislature funded the Tribal Housing Grant Fund in 2025, so those dollars have already been allocated by the legislature to OHCS. The item that we're working on is trying to create an other funds account to deposit those tribal housing grant funds into. Creating that other fund account will allow those dollars to be used on a more flexible timeline for tribes, rather than having them have to use those funds in our biennium time period. So in other words, those funds would be on the timeline that is most beneficial for the tribes in their work using the Tribal Housing Grant Funds. The other item that would be included in the Tribal Housing Grant Fund bill is increasing the AMI for Tribal Housing Grant Fund dollars. That is one of the requests from the tribes to increase it so that they can better serve their communities. The other item that HSD is working on is making some updates to the shelter bill that passed in the 2025 session. I put an asterisk there because this item is actually included in our agency-wide technical fix bill, which we'll talk about in a moment. But just really quickly, there are some updates to the shelter bill that would support tribes' work, such as clearly stating in statute that regional coordinators includes tribes, and some other items. So just know that there is another item having to do with tribal housing the HSD is working on. That item is actually included in the agency-wide technical fix bill. And then we will move that on to JC. If you could introduce yourself and talk about the agency-wide technical fix bill.
Sure. Thanks, Jill. Hello, everyone. My name is JC Davis. I use she, her pronouns. I also have the privilege of serving in our government relations team. And I also very leadily support our administrative rules. So our technical fix LC is really looking at rulemaking authority and some statutory cleanups. And there is a long list of items that we've included. So I invite those that would like additional clarity to stay and join the breakout room and learn more about these details. So I'll move through this quick, but just know we can go into depth if you have any questions. The first one we'll mention is really aligning with Director Bell's public service of excellence striving goals. And there are some areas in which our staff reporting requirements do not seem to be a productive use of time. And that's kind of where we're leaning at with the Housing Choice Advisory Council amendment. The Housing Choice Voucher Program, we have not received funding in a few biennium for this program, unfortunately, but we are still required to produce a legislative report that is nearly a shell because there's no funding in this requirement at this time. So we are looking to amend this and make sure that our reporting requirements align with the funding. And when we have things to report, we absolutely can do that. The next thing, as Jill mentioned, we are looking at including our tribal neighbors intentionally within our shelter programs and regional coordinators definition. So we'll be carving out additional statutory clarity in that definition space. And I will jump down to the Oregon Affordable Housing Tax Credit because they're also looking at some statutory cleanup within terms that are being defined. Although there was recent legislation, it was House Bill 2087, I believe, that expanded some allowable preservation uses to include the OHATC. We are now looking at updating the definition so that it's not as restrictive and it reflects this new flexibility for this resource. The other items that are listed here for the HOPE or the Homeowners Assistance Program yes, thank you. Sorry. Our HOPE program is actually carving out some additional rulemaking authorities so we could better define family members of veterans in our administrative rules. There was a bill, Senate Bill 79 back in the 21 session that allowed us to really expand our HOPE services for veteran survivors and family members. So we're hoping to really carve out that intentionality in our rulemaking. The last one I will mention is the human resources technical fix to make sure that we are aligning with the FBI requirements to the new updates in ORS 181 alpha that now require some of our mays to turn to shalls in regards to our hiring requirements and criminal background check requirements as well. So I know that was a little bit of a long list, but I am happy to discuss any of these LCs further. Thanks, Jill.
Thank you. All right, Sydney, we will go to the next slide. So as I said, those were really our policy ideas, and now we're going to quickly go over really what are our funding ideas. So Nathan, once again, if we can go back to you to quickly summarize what homeownership is working on.
Hi, everyone. Okay, so I've got 3 pops I'm going to talk through. The first one is ECHO funds for the Manufactured Home Replacement Program. So within the MMCRC, we have our Manufactured Home Replacement Program, which has been operating on one-time only funding every biennium, the last couple bienniums, to replace kind of dilapidated, outdated, very non-efficient manufactured homes around the state. But because we can't ask for new revenues, and this was one time, we've have an idea to move our program that gets funding from the public purpose charge, which is paid by utility users in certain utilities throughout the state. Have that come under the MMCRC, and that will provide some sustainable funding for that program. And we'll have to be asking again for one-time only funding on that. We are going to continue working on that because unfortunately it will have geographic limitations because only certain providers have that charge. So that is an unfortunate change we'll have to make, but we are going to continue working on that in the future. But that's our first pop. The second one is our Lift Home Ownership Article 11Q bonds. We're asking for 150 million for that. And then we will be doing a preservation ask for manufactured home park communities, working with our ARH partners, but that ask is unclear at this time and will be determined throughout the summer.
Thank you, Nathan. Henry, how about if we turn it over to you?
Yeah, happy to. I'm going to do affordable rental housing and disaster recovery right now. So just starting with affordable rental housing, our first ask is our lift rental, our Article 11Q bonds as well, 540 million. We then have our permanent supportive housing 11Q that we're asking for. And just a disclaimer again, normally this is packaged general fund, which is for rent assistance because we're revenue neutral. There's some nuance there. If you come to the ARH breakout, we can talk about that in some more detail. And then affordable rental housing preservation and stabilization, the amount there is to be determined. And similarly with our portfolio expansion and compliance capacity, that's also an amount to be determined. And we could talk more about that in a breakout if helpful. And then on the disaster recovery and resilience side, that first one is our authorization to spend down the community development block grant disaster recovery money that we got for the 2020 Labor Day wildfires. We do this every year. It's just to say that the agency is allowed to spend the federal money that we got. And then that second bullet is staffing for the post block grant work that we know is existing in the state of Oregon and the recovery and resilience needs that will continue even after this block grant is spent down. So some forward-looking stuff there for disaster recovery.
Thanks, Henry. And then we will end the slide by talking about Housing Stabilization Division. And as you can see on the slide, there are no revenue neutral pops from HSD. However, there are ongoing conversations about maintaining funding for eviction prevention, rehousing, shelter, and long-term rental assistance. And if you come to the HSD breakout room, we can talk in more detail about that. All right, we will move into the next slide. Yes. So before we go into breakout rooms, we just want to make sure everybody knows the process. I'm sure many people have been through this process many times, but just to make sure everybody's on the same page. So all state agencies have to produce an agency request budget. Those agency request budgets are due to the governor and the state CFO toward the end of August. And then they are, I'm going to go off camera and see if that helps with bandwidth. And then they are published on September 1st. The governor takes all of those agency request budgets and she produces a governor's recommended budget. A major difference between the governor's recommended budget, known as a GRB, and the agency request budgets is that the GRB must be a balanced budget. So her budget has to be balanced to the most recent revenue forecast. She is required to turn in a governor's recommended budget by December 1st to the legislature. And then the legislature uses that as a beginning point for budget discussions at the legislature during session. Next year, we're going into a long session. So that means that we will have a session that lasts from January until June. And as we get closer to June, the legislature makes decisions about agency budgets and they start passing budget bills as we get closer and closer to the end of session. All of those budget bills together equate into Oregon's budget. And then on July 1st, it starts a new biennium and the process starts all over again. All right, so that was a very quick overview of the next steps in the budgeting process. And Sydney will go to the next slide. So now we're going to go into breakout rooms. The breakout rooms are based on divisions. So there is a breakout room for affordable rental housing, a breakout room for disaster recovery and resilience, a breakout room for homeownership, and a breakout room for housing stabilization division. There also is another room that you can stay in, and that is you can stay in this main room. And JC is going to talk about the agency-wide technical fix in this main room. So you have lots of choices. You are also able, you can select any of the breakout rooms to go to. You also have the ability to go to multiple breakout rooms. So you can always come back to the main room and choose a different breakout room to go to. We're anticipating that the breakout discussions will last for about 20 minutes, and then we will return to this main room. All right, with that, Sydney, I think that we can start allowing people to choose their breakout room.
And if anybody has any issues or wants support getting into a breakout room, just speak up or tell us in the chat and we'll support you getting into the room you're wanting to.
Just to note, y'all, I see some of the comments. Each breakout room will be recorded. So we will keep a record. So those of us that maybe wanted to jump into one space, but really also wanted to hear about another, just know that opportunity will be recorded. And we will be providing additional information within the ARB landing page that I saved earlier in the chat. So if you can, if you click on the breakout rooms, which are currently in progress, there's an opportunity for you to select to join one of the breakout rooms. If you are having any technical issues, please let us know in the chat and we'll get you guys moving.
I got Joe H. Johns who was asking for stable HSD.
Got it. Okay, perfect. Just going to give folks just another minute to help migrate if folks wanted to go into a different room. And then we'll get started right on the technical fix build today. Does that work for you, Annabelle?
It works. Jesse, did you need support?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I think I missed a part where you told me how to get to the breakout room.
We didn't fully state it, but I can get you into which one would you like to join?
The lift or whichever one is covering rental assistance.
Rental assistance or rental housing?
Rental housing, sorry.
All right, room 3, ARH. Sending you now.
I just
To
took care of
HOD.
Sarah. Sarah in
Yep.
the chat asked for homeownership, and I just took care of her.
Awesome, thank you.
Thank you.
Doug, we're on it. All right, sending you there in just a sec.
All right. I'm going to go ahead and move into our technical fix build just because I do know there's a lot of notes to include and this is being recorded. So if you all need additional help, please add it in the chat and we're happy. We have a couple of great folks here from the OHCS team that will help navigate you to those breakout spaces. But in the sake of time, I do want to move through these topics. They were a little, the way that I had it in my list was a little different than on the slide. So I wanted to make sure I definitely reviewed all of the notes in regards to all 5 of these topics. I'm going to start at the top around the Housing Choice Advisory Council requirement again. At any point, if there is questions or if I'm going too fast or clarity that's needed, feel free to let me know or you can drop it in the chat. So the legislature established this reporting requirement back in 2013, and that was to support the oversight of the Housing Choice Advisory, Housing Choice Voucher Program. And it's that program and that fund that was revitalized a few times during the legislative long sessions. But since the 21 session, we have not seen another dedicated investment there. And therefore, since then, the sundown of funds has equated to a shell of a report. And as I mentioned, the public excellence thing is we really want to make sure that our staff and our team members are utilized to the best of our abilities. And we are happy to report on anything that we are funded with. But sometimes when these reporting requirements come in and they're just not a productive use of public use of time. So we are hoping to resurrect this reporting requirement should we ever and when we get another voucher program investment. But at this point, the funds have sundowned. And so we would like the reporting requirement to match. The next thing I will mention is the shelter program, tribal inclusion. And now this would be a statutory update in the terminology in the definition for the regional coordinators. There was an inclusionary piece about a regional coordinator needed to represent a county. And that doesn't always represent our tribal sovereign nations. And that definition kind of excluded folks unknowingly. And you know how it is. Sometimes in these sessions, these bills are really moved through and we don't always get all of the clarity or all of the technical fixes. So this is definitely circling back on our shelter bill from the last long session in 2025. And we wanted to expand that regional coordinator definition to make sure that our tribal neighbors have an opportunity to access these shelter resources as well. The Housing Choice Landlord Guarantee Program, I hesitated in the larger group, and I apologize for missing this in my quick review, but that really relates to ORS 456378, subsection 1. And I would like to kind of just read a little bit on the current requirements here. Currently, limits coverage. This part of the statute is not allowing our Housing Choice Landlord Guarantee program to have the flexibilities in regards to the Oregon Rehousing Initiative program. So currently it says tenants who have received rental assistance A under the Housing Choice voucher program, or B from the Rehousing Initiative under section 5411, chapter 15, Oregon Law 2023. So that's the section of the statute that we're hoping to update. And we have clarified with a lot of intentionality that the legislative intent was to extend the coverage of the Housing Choice Landlord Guarantee Program to tenants placed under OHCS state funding. So those housing initiatives and the appropriate bill of this that associates these funds, that's what we're hoping to include. This technical fix is really to support our Housing Stabilization Division and the staff that are working there, and really clarify further House Bill 5019 from the 23 session. That was our department's agency, or the department's budget bill. And that's where this was, with a small mention in the lines of a long budget line. And this is where we would like to clarify. So we would like to remove the reference of the House Bill 5019, which was our budget bill in 2023, and replace that with language authorizing OHCS to define further rehousing initiatives in our rules. So that's where we would go in and we would update the Housing Choice Landlord Guarantee Program rules, and we would define this rehousing initiative as it legislatively intended to be. The next part of our technical fix bill is around the HOPE program, and that's the homeowners division. This HOPE program has a allocation through the document recording fee that's dedicated to serve Oregon's veterans. And in 2021, in House Bill 2094, 2096, I think it was 2094, y'all, that allowed OHCS to carve out and define veteran for ourselves. And in an effort to bridge our housing resources to all of those that have served, we really look to expand the veterans definition to the further extent to what the state had currently adopted in ORS 408. Our definition also includes those that have received any kind of discharge that is honorable or other than honorable discharges. So that means that if you were a member of the armed forces and you received a discharge that was not honorable, but you were able to go back to the federal VA and appeal that discharge and were awarded veterans benefits, that we would recognize that veteran status as well. And so they can bring back any kind of proof from the VA, and that allows some folks that challenge their discharge successfully and are proven to be veterans by the benefits that the federal government is allowed. We would absolutely acknowledge that effort and bring those folks into Oregon's housing resources as well. The piece on the HOPE program technical fix, it really came from Senate Bill 79, and that was in the 21 session as well. And that kind of expanded the HOPE program to not only serve those veterans that we defined it a little bit more expansively, but it also said, hey, OHCS, you can serve veterans and their family members. So we have been using that carve out in Senate Bill 79 to intentionally include survivors and immediate family members to those expanded veterans spaces to align with our veterans definition. And so now we're just looking at codifying that intentionality, and we are requesting that statute be updated so that way we can define in our rules what veteran family member includes. We look forward to a robust rulemaking on that topic as well after it is successful. I'll quickly mention the OHATC, the Oregon Affordable Housing Tax Credit as well. That is another statutory definition update. And although we recently received that House Bill 2087, that is the one that expanded allowable preservation activities under the OHATC. The current statutory definition of preservation remained unchanged, and that's where there was a conflict. So the current definition is restrictive and reflects an outdated understanding of affordable housing preservation. So we are hoping to update that statutory definition so that it is very inclusive and could be looked at for the OHATC piece. The last thing that I will mention is we received a notice back in February that there were recent updates in ORS 181, 195. And that required us to also be aligned with the federal government's public law 92 544. Yeah, I think it was 544. We will also have all of these details in additional rule highlight documents stored on that ARB landing page. So sorry if my numbers are guessing at this point, but basically the FBI guidance is requiring us to host criminal background requirements on hiring in certain different perspectives. So if we're bringing folks into our internal databases, if we're going to be hiring folks in within a certain amount of time, all of that is specified in ORS 181 alpha. And we will be aligning our statute to that subject individual requirements as well. So a lot of mays turning to shalls, basically. That is, in a nutshell, all of the items that are currently included in our legislative fix bill, or our legislative concept technical fix. And we look forward to having ongoing conversations, not only with our governor's office and the leadership here, but with all of you. And also as we move closer to the legislative session, we will absolutely be advocating for these small but efficient technical fixes to better streamline the use of our time and to carve out the transparency and the intentionality that our programs are really hoping to use. So pending any questions that anybody else has, those were the items that were listed in our technical LC. I'm not seeing any questions, Annabelle. I think we're good.
I'm not seeing any either. I would agree as of now.
Thank you, Sid.
That just means you did a good job explaining, or it takes a while to process also.
Yeah. There's quite a few there. Me too. I like to kind of chew on things for a moment. We'll just mention, and I'll probably drop it back in the chat when we return, everyone returns back into this main room, that we will have ongoing resources, information about our town hall that we hosted earlier this week and this virtual webinar. And we will also have like highlights and one pagers around these concepts as they develop into fingers crossed bills within the next 2027 legislative session.
As a logistics update, the breakout rooms will be joining us again in probably about 2 minutes.
Outstanding. Yep. All right, y'all. I know folks are going to be joining us back in this main room shortly. Appreciate you all being here. If there are any additional questions, we will also drop this email in our chat. You can find additional resources back on this landing page on the OHCS website. Yeah, I will turn it back over to our facilitation team once everyone gets back in here.
It sounds like we have some conversations finishing up in those rooms, so they should be joining us within the next couple minutes. Thank you.
Welcome back.
Welcome back, everyone. We're going to pause for just a moment to allow everybody to return from the breakout rooms. All right. Thank you, everybody. I know there's never enough time to talk about all the things to talk about. But I wanted to make sure before we end today's town hall meeting that everybody knows some follow-ups, some next steps. So the first one is we will be posting some more information on our website. We have some questions that we captured today. We will be answering those and doing an FAQ type of document on our website. So please make sure to come back to our website and check it out for additional information. The second thing is that this is, of course, not your only opportunity to ask us questions. You see on the slide in front of you an email address for us here at OHCS. Please feel free to use this email address to send us questions, comments. Again, there's never enough time, but please use this. And if also you're a processor like me and you think of the perfect question 15 minutes after the meeting has ended, that is fine. Please let us know. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. It is really helpful as we continue developing our agency request budget to hear your questions, your comments. We will be incorporating as much as we possibly can. And again, please remember that our agency request budget will be published on September 1st. So be looking for that as well. With that, government relations team, is there any last items we should make sure that our guests know?
I would just say we were just getting into a good conversation, so please email any questions to this after the email here. I'm happy to respond and chat further. But thanks for the engagement. That was a lovely quick combo.
It was a quick combo. Division directors, is there any last thing that we should make sure attendees know before we sign off? Perfect. I will take silence as everything went perfectly. Thank you so much, everyone, for giving us an hour of your time this morning. And again, please let us know if there are any other questions or comments you have. We really appreciate the time, energy, and thoughtfulness of everything you've shared with us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.